Hi, welcome to the Green Room episode 4. This is our now weekly podcast where we talk about things that are going on in the energy sector or energy saving news for homeowners, small businesses, that sort of thing. So I'm here with Nick, my co-host, and my name's James. And today, Nick, what are we talking about?
So in the brief today, James, we're talking about heating. So what are the different types of heating you can have that uses electricity to power it? So what are in terms of the measures, what's good about each of them?
Yeah.
Then we've got a little section about what's in the news, and then finally a little bit of a fun feature.
A fun feature.
Yes.
I cannot wait. So first of all, why would you? Going back to last week, following on a little bit, we now know electricity is about 15p a kilowatt hour. Gas is about 3.5p kilowatt hour. So it's cheaper to heat your home with gas. Why would people be heating their homes with electric?
So on the basis of it, so 99.9% of people have an electric meter in the house. Mm-hmm. So everyone is going to have an electric meter in the house, near enough. But the other gas meter, not every house is going to be connected to the gas grid.
Yeah.
Some are going to be off gas grid or self-sustainable or whatever. But everyone, by and large, has got electricity. Mm-hmm. So, if you've got multiple fuel sources from the mains, that's good because you've got some choice. But, unfortunately, if electricity is the only one that you've got, then sometimes your choices are quite limited. Okay. And in certain cases, it might be that electricity to use to heat not just your space heating and your hot water might be the only choice that you can really have.
So just have to use electricity.
So for instance, if you're like a really high story flat, if you're on say 12th, 14th floor, you just wouldn't put gas in there for health and safety reasons. So it's much easier to get an electric heater in. So,
fine. And I think we've seen loads of comments on our website, which is the Green Age, regarding electric heating. People tend to be pretty upset because they're limited by choice. They pay over the odds. I want to heat my house. A person with gas pays essentially a quarter of what I do to heat my house. So what we're going to do today is go through the different ways you can heat your house, different kinds of electric heating, basically. And we're going to talk about which we would use if we had a choice. Mm-hmm. And then we'll see how we get on.
I was just going to say something quite interesting. So might just be worth mentioning. So when we got to about the 1970s, everyone kind of thought the electric heating would be the absolute norm that everyone would go for because mm-hmm. of the use of nuclear power.
And in France, that's happened, right?
Yes. But then I think, and I don't know quite the dates, but sometime in the 70s we discovered this massive oil reserves and gas reserves off the North Sea. And so therefore the adoption of mains gas became much more mm-hmm. into the economy and so forth. So that whole, what I was going to say is storage heaters, extremely popular.
Yeah. We'll go on to them because they're the kind of slightly more complicated electric heating. We'll go on to that.
But yeah, you can still have them. But essentially, we thought once that electricity would be the future and so forth. But it's quite a diverse mix.
But even if you have an electric heater in your house, there is a high chance that a gas-powered electricity power plant is powering your electric heating.
Yeah.
So it's a bit weird, right? So you've got a gas power station powering your electric heating. So you might be powered by gas anyway. Anyway, that's a small one. So the most basic form is just an electric convection heater.
And you can see this sometimes in where you've got, I don't know, just kind of like multiple dwelling units where you've got just a room. You might have a plug-in heater. That'll be your most basic one. It's not.
And so there tend to be fans.
Exactly.
Almost like a Dyson fan.
You can go to Argos and pick one up for
20 quid.
Exactly. Plug it in, it works.
So really convenient. That's the great thing. You can plug it in, take it out, put it into another room, plug it in, nice and warm.
Extremely efficient. So for 1 unit of power comes out 1 unit of useful heat.
Yeah.
So 100% efficient.
I think I think everyone's used to fan heater. I think one of the biggest issues with them is, number one, if you turn them off, unless the room has warmed up, very quickly it feels cool again. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the big issue. They are really impacted by cold drafts and that sort of thing because the air is warm, so you're stripping all that heat out with cold drafts. Then obviously you're cold again. And obviously it's 15 pence kilowatt hour to run them. So, an average fan heater might be 1 kilowatt. So for every hour it's on, it's going to cost you 15p to run.
Well, they could be much bigger than that. So you can. It's not inconceivable to see them at 2.5, 3.5 kilowatts.
Yeah. So you're looking at sort of almost 50p an hour to run, which, if you're on a standard, that's a standard variable tariff. You're on a economy 7 tariff, you're running it during the day, or you're on a prepayment tariff. Although there is these new caps in place, but even so, you can spend a hell of a lot using these things. So I think a fan heater is used basically because it's very, very flexible, it's quick, quite handy.
Yep.
We used to have, and we're going to move on to now, oil-filled heaters. So these are, my dad used to make sure I had one of these whenever I was kind of renting a place, basically. And if everything goes wrong, you put one of these in, they warm up really slowly. But once they get warm, they throw out quite nice heat. They tend to be slightly higher rated. So if an average fan heater is like a kilowatt,
they can look like a radiator, sort of a movable.
Yeah, they do. They look like one of the kind of old-fashioned ones. Again, you can move them from room to room. They're relatively
good for granny houses and games rooms.
Yeah.
Off property. That
sort of thing. And you kind of, they have this freeze function, which I'm sure fan heaters do as well. But this freezing function. So if a room gets too cold, this heater then comes on, as I say, very, very slowly. It warms up the room, stops the room freezing. So they're not something you would use just to throw a bit of heat into a room quickly, because they do take a long time to warm up. They tend to be rated much higher in terms of the wattage. So you're going to be spending like 30p an hour to run them. So it's not one that we'd suggest normally. So then we go to storage heaters.
What about halogen? We're going to come that.
Well, let's come back to that.
Come back to that. Okay.
So storage heaters. Right, storage heaters you mentioned. So why were storage heaters introduced?
So when you've got power sources like nuclear power, it's extremely They have a core, a nuclear core.
Yeah.
That gets extremely hot, and it just generally stays on for decades without turning.
They turn them off a little bit for maintenance and stuff.
That sort of stuff, but it's they use incredible amount of water just to kind of cool them down. So normally, what they would do is that the cores would stay on, and then electricity would be generated 24/7 from a nuclear power station. Mm-hmm. Now the problem is, we do most of the activities during the day. So at night, when we don't use the energy, essentially all that electricity is being produced and it's going nowhere, because in those days, and certainly even to some extent now, we can't effectively store it. Mm-hmm. So yes, essentially the idea was that we invented storage heaters where within the heater itself you can see it. It used to be this very bulky thing that used to sit on the wall.
They're massive, aren't they? Yeah. I mean, they're the new one's less big, but when we've gone into properties and seen them,
yes,
they're big, they're ugly,
clunky things, but they did serve a purpose in the sense that they'd have materials within the heater itself. So when the electricity was cheap, because on the economy 7 at night, when you are on economy 7 for those 7, 9 or 10 hours, depending on which tariff you've got, the storage heater is charging. So it's taking the cheaper electricity, storing that energy in, and then when you need it throughout the day, it's slowly releasing it. So that's the concept.
So the energy company have basically artificially created a market. So they want to use the electricity at night, so they're like, okay, we can't charge as much as we would during the day, so we'll give you that cheap. But
which essentially is an extremely clever idea. So
it is clever.
This whole thing was a clever idea.
On the flip side, they charge you more for your electricity during the day. So instead of sort of your 15p, it might be up at 18, 19p. So they are clever. I think one of the biggest issues we're facing is that the nuclear power plants in the UK are due to be closed down in the relatively near future. I think if they all get closed down when they are specifically due to be closed, then we are in all sorts of trouble, because the government are yet to start replacing that capacity with anything. So I think nuclear power will be about for a long time, and there are plans afoot to build new nuclear power plants, although I don't think any spades have gone in the ground yet. But I feel that, so while it used to be nuclear, we now have things like wind power, right? So wind power is intermittent. It tends to be windier during the evenings, though, and at night. And so this electricity is now being produced via a different mechanism, so wind power rather than nuclear, but we still need a mechanism to use that, right? And so things like storage heaters, while I thought they were going to sort of fall away, last year we produced 30% of our electricity from wind power. So I might need to fact check that. But we produce so much electricity from wind power.
We always fact check.
We need a mechanism to use that electricity. So this is a great way of doing it. Things like storage heaters.
Provided you can tell it to charge up when the wind is blowing.
Well, yes, absolutely. But if there's wind in the grid, if there's electricity,
because you're assuming at night normally it's windier.
Yes,
so,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. Now, one of the big problems with the old storage heaters was
they release the heat too. How do you say? It's too intense. If you're standing by the heater, it's so hot. But then if you're on the other side of the room, it's not very pleasant because the heat doesn't kind of.
But because they leak, right? So you were talking earlier about how they charge. Well, it's essentially a lump of bricks,
and they weren't fan assisted in the or there's very little fan assistance in the early days.
But they have this sort of insulated area around the bricks, and the problem was if that leaks, it lets the heat out, which is kind of how they work. Because in theory, you charge it during the night, and these bricks are nice and warm, and then in the evening, that covering disappears, and so the heat escapes. Mm-hmm. The problem with the old ones is the heat escaped during the day. You'd come back in the evening, try and turn it on, press on, and it wouldn't release any heat because there was no heat left. So you'd have to press the boost button,
which then turns it into a
fan heater. Yeah. But you're paying more for the electricity at that time, so they become really expensive to run.
It's not the Economy 7 or Economy 9 or Economy 10 charging hours.
New storage heaters, price-wise, so it's Dimplex, isn't it? Dimplex, the Quantum ones. Mm-hmm.
Those are top of the range, I'd say. So
and
that's probably the best ones you can.
Well, you went down to Dimplex, didn't you?
Yes. It's a good place. Good place. Yeah, you learn quite. Yeah, it's worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And how much are you paying for a new storage heater?
Well, for one of those, for the Quantum ones, just because they are made with, is what they say is unbelievably new technology. I think they sort of start to retail around £500-600, but you can actually get a modern slimline fan-assisted storage heater for a fraction of that price. But
if you don't go with the brand,
you don't go with the brand. And it's probably the Quantum E is probably the top of the range, but it will cost you quite a bit to kind of switch all your particularly if you've got a big house and it's all on electric, then big outlay to with the install cost to get them all swapped over.
But the good thing is, so if for example you have an old flat and it's got 3 or 4 of these storage heaters in them, mm-hmm. To replace that you might be looking in excess of £2,000 to replace them with new storage heaters. Once they are in, to run them, because you are taking advantage of this cheap electricity in the evening, you're getting, it's costing you half as much to run them. Yeah, so if I get my cheap electricity at night and it's 7p-ish for electricity, which is very unusual, I'm therefore, if it's a 2 kilowatt system, I'm in theory only paying 1 kilowatt because I'm paying half price. So is that a bit confusing? A little bit?
Not to me, but anyway.
Fine. Basically, to run a storage heater during the day, because you're using electricity that's half the price, because of this Economy 7 tariff, it is therefore half the price to run the fan heater. Mm-hmm. So if you're running it for an hour, you might only be paying 7.5p if it was 1 kilowatt, which is a very small storage heater. Basically, half the price of a normal.
Yeah, but if it's not efficient, then there's no point. So you need to look at other options.
And I think the key there is if you move from storage heaters to a different type of electric heating, get rid of Economy 7. Yeah, because Economy 7 is the only one that is going to work well with storage heaters, just because the way they charge and release the heat.
Because the high tariff, the non-Economy 7 tariff, penalises you essentially for using it during peak hours.
Yeah. So the ones we talked about at the moment, on the whole, we're using convection heating, right? So we can go on now so there's infrared heating, which uses infrared, and the halogen heaters as well.
Which essentially similar technology. The halogen ones are near infrared. That's why you can, when you actually go on train stations and stuff, you can see them glow.
Yeah, so like in a pub, and it's got the umbrella, and underneath that you've got the full glowing things.
Whereas the infrared panels, or the far infrared, as it was technology, basically came from Germany and Austria, and these things come like panels, like picture frames like that. So
That's not one, by the way. Just with that.
we could probably show one because we've got a few in the office and stuff. Essentially they can be quite aesthetically pleasing, but they emit a very gentle heat, and for every input of electricity coming in, near enough is one kind of input of useful heat coming out. But the way you feel that heat is a little bit like, if you were walking on a cold day, on a sunny day, and you're going to the direction of the sun, your surface of your skin will feel warm because the sun gives off infrared heat, and then any solid object absorbs it.
Yeah.
So the surface of it will feel quite pleasant, but actually the air, the volume of the air is quite cold.
Yeah.
Hence why you feel cold, but at that moment you feel quite warm. So the infrared heaters heat the surface areas directly. So and the idea is that if you can store enough of it, that's when you kind of get the secondary benefit of getting the thermal mass up to speed. And because a lot of these infrared heaters, they're in terms of their rating, they are lower for wattage. It can be a more efficient way of heating a room. They're quite good in terms of, say, if you've got a home office, you can put those things in, and you're going to be there all day, etc., etc.
Yeah,
that will pleasantly heat up the solid objects around you, and then when it reaches thermal mass, it'll be quite a pleasant way because it's kind of captured within all the walls, etc.
Yeah, and I think the difference between a storage heater and infrared heater. So an infrared heater is permanent, I'd say. I mean, you can get feet for them and that sort of thing, but on the whole,
you can put them on ceilings
because put them on ceilings, get all your heating. But as you say, you can get mirrors, you can get chalkboards, you can get your portrait put on it, you can do whatever you want. So they're quite aesthetically pleasing. Cost-wise, I mean, how long's a piece of string, right? They can be anything.
It's difficult because it's slightly because it's heating in a different form. So you're comparing convection and infrared. But I mean, if you speak to the manufacturers of infrared heaters, they do claim it's a kind of more efficient way of heating, but it's a bit of a tricky one to.
We have it. So we're still in midwinter, and we have an office here which occasionally gets very, very cold, I'm told, and we have an infrared heater in our sort of foyer bit. And despite being open to the elements all the time, when that thing is on, you feel it. Now that is near infrared.
That's medium infrared, which is kind of like
it's glowing, so therefore
yes,
it makes it near.
It's a medium waves can still glow. Yeah. Okay. So it's not a kind of a full near infrared one. It's a medium one. And
just so the infrared panels themselves, the far infrared, they don't glow. Then they get to about 85 degrees ish. 90 degrees, and that's thank you. That's when the infrared is emitted.
So if you touch the surface, it will feel quite hot.
It'll be hot. Yeah, be like a radiator. I think the thing is then they're controllable in that they're either on or off. You can't turn down infrared temperature because otherwise it won't produce infrared, if that makes sense. So to regulate the temperature, you're waiting for walls and air temperatures rise. You're waiting for the walls to get warm, throw that temperature throw that heat back into the room. And so your thermostat setting is about 3 degrees lower than you typically set with a convection heater.
But the useful thing I was going to say, so when thermal mass is reached, so i.e. you get the air temperature, because all the surrounding objects are quite warm and they've emitted heat back into the room. You can, so say if you open the door and cold air comes in and you close that door, normally on a convection heater, say the fan heater, that heat would escape extremely quickly and feel quite comfortable, whereas infrared, because you've stored it in the room, you wouldn't see that as much, and that's why it's one of the benefits. But
and then the other thing is, so if I came and stood behind you now and the infrared is firing at you, hitting you, you would shadow me in terms of the heat. I wouldn't get the heat benefit.
That's the limitation. Yeah.
That's the limitation.
So you can get cold spots.
And I think the other limitation is they are just more expensive than a fan heater. Yeah, I mean they are considerably more expensive, or at least they can be. If I want a mirror that's throwing out heat, I can spend £1,000 pretty comfortably on a heater, which is a lot of money. So in terms of how they work, so a 1 kilowatt heater would cost us 15p an hour to run. If it was on full time, the theory is because it's infrared, you don't need it on as long, and so you get the benefits there. Basically, we're not waiting for the air to warm up to feel the heat benefit. We should be feeling it within a few minutes of turning it on, and then when we get to temperature, we can turn it off much quicker. So that's where you're getting your energy savings. Right, more electric heating types. So these types are now typically, well, not typically, you are not going to put a ground source heat pump in a sort of 12-storey block of flats, but these are extremely expensive to buy. Air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps. The government consider them kind of renewable technologies. They are, so an air source heat pump, typically you're looking at about 10k to install. Ground source heat pump can be over 20k pretty comfortably. So these are serious bits of kit.
It depends as well, because they work on lower emission temperatures. You might need you need more volume basically for that heat to be let into the rooms. And normally what people do is on the ground floor, for instance, kitchen and stuff, if they get a heat pump, they would install underfloor heating, for instance, because it's not that it's more efficient, it's just a better way to deliver something that's...
You need more surface area getting out here.
Yeah, exactly.
So you need bigger radiators.
Big radiators, that sort of, and insulation. So you wouldn't do it to a period property because period properties tend to leak. So you need to get something with good U values, so lots of insulation in the walls.
So new build works perfectly.
Or retrofit, but where you're looking at the whole envelope.
So you've got to do the
loft, floors, etc.
Which we will talk about at some other point. We're going to talk about
It's our favourite subject.
But the heat pumps work. So with a ground source heat pump, you are basically taking latent warmth so you're taking heat from the ground. And this is why the efficiency doesn't really change during the whole year, because as soon as you're a metre or so beneath the ground temperature stays pretty constant throughout the year. So even in the winter, they are as efficient as they are in the summer, essentially. And we're talking about minute thermal gradients here. So, my sister had a ground source heat pump put in, and they put these boreholes in, which are massive holes in the ground, and it was like this drilling bit of kit.
Did you get the underfloor heating as well?
She had underfloor heating. She was doing the whole house retrofit thing you're talking about. But they drilled holes 120 metres deep.
Saw the videos.
Which is, it's a serious impressive. It was like Armageddon in the back garden. So
impressive. It'd be extremely difficult to do it in central London, say.
Yes,
how would you get a digger?
Hit a tube or all sorts of stuff. And I imagine you have to get serious planning to be able to put things in.
The other thing I see is people complain about the air source heat pumps because it's a fan.
Yeah. We get loads of comments that noisy, aren't they?
Noise, yeah.
Yeah, I think the other thing about the air source heat pumps is that during the winter, so I was talking about these tiny temperature gradients. So ground source heat pump, less than a degree. You ping the water down at 15 degrees, it might come up at 16, but it might not even be that much. And you then compress it, and you take that kind of, the heat gets driven up really quickly, and then that's what we're using. So in an air source heat pump, you're taking the heat in the air, and you do have heat in the air right down to minus 273. I can't remember the chemistry.
Absolute zero.
Is that absolute zero? 273? Something like that.
Yeah.
Rings a bell. Anyway, so you take the heat out of the air and you compress it to drive the heat up. Now, in the winter, if you try and take heat from the air, if it's 0 degrees,
basically the less warm molecules that you have in the air, it's you get a lot less heat out of the surrounding environment.
So if it's 27 degrees, it's very easy to get something up to 60 degrees. So I take that decent heat, compress it, don't need very much electricity. So they run really efficiently in the summer. The issue is that most of us will heat our homes in the winter, apart from my dad.
Not everyone,
apart from my dad. And there, your efficiency is going right down. So just be careful when you get an air source heat pump. I would be, unless it's a very, very well insulated house, unless you have solar panels, I'd probably look away from air source heat pumps. We are now going to get loads of complaints from air source heat pump companies. But
I don't think they're actually that noisy.
I don't think they're that noisy. I just think the efficiency isn't great. So when I want to run it in February, it's expensive to run.
But you can still the limitation of the ground source heat pumps is in terms of the space and being able to install it, whereas actually air source heat pumps you can pretty much install it in most places.
I think the other thing worth mentioning about the heat pumps is they are both you can get the renewable heat incentive for both. So as I said, the government consider these renewable heating forms. So the government will pay you for 7 years, basically for every unit of hot water or heating you've produced, which the idea is the renewable heat incentive is designed to pay back the install costs over the 7 years, pretty much. So if you're going to do it, obviously you have to drop the outlay, which is expensive, but you do get that money back. And in terms of electricity, for a ground source heat pump, 1 unit of electricity can produce 5 units of useful heat. So they're 500% efficient. So they're really, that is good because it suddenly makes them comparable with gas in terms of your heating bills.
Well, my recommendation would be to look at it if you're doing a whole house approach. So if you're doing a wider retrofit project, so i.e. you're building an extension or loft and you're doing lots of other refurbishment on an existing house. Obviously, if it's a new house, then it definitely comes into the equation because it sort of gets absorbed in the whole build cost.
But if you had a new house, right, I'm going to throw these questions at you now. So would you, if you've got a limited budget, presumably you look past a ground source heat pump, you'd insulate the hell out of it, ideally, and you'd use a different form of heating. Would you, or would you?
It depends. Because depends on how you choose to build a house. So if you build a house out of timber or SIPs or, building in a traditional way out of brick is probably the most expensive. But then if you can say compromise on the type of materials you use, not compromise, so that's not the right word. If you get more sort of cost-effective materials that have hit the building market over the last 10 years or so, then you can kind of do lots more with the heating source and what you do inside, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be too fussed about it being a masonry property. I would just I'll look at the whole budget and then see what sort of works for me. But if I had the choice, I'd probably do a ground source heat pump because if you're doing the foundations and stuff, you're going to be doing lots of digging.
Yeah.
So,
but if you had access to gas,
tricky one. I'd probably still do it just because I'm.
You do what you do.
I've been involved, in sort of the green sector for so many years. So
for
me, it would be quite a nice thing to have.
Yeah, and they are relatively. They don't really go wrong. I'm trying to look for the word. I just have a complete mind blank there. But they
in terms of moving parts,
there's not a huge amount going on.
There isn't a combustion process like in gas, how your fuel comes in and it can be lots of things.
So they last, and they are they are pretty good. So basically, that's covered it really. Mm-hmm. They are all the types of electric heating you can really go for. I'm sure we will have comments from people who've got new and different types of heating.
Briefly go on a list and talk about EPC rating, so energy performance certificate. So what I would say is, if it's a fan or heater or a non-permanent heater, then you don't get much credit on your EPC score.
It's rubbish. We have gone into properties where they have replaced fan heaters with new fan heaters because they've been told these are the best things since sliced bread, and they do nothing for an energy rating. So if you are a landlord a landlord mainly trying to rent out the property, and you have electric heaters in the house at the moment, don't just go and look for kind of eco-electric heaters because you will get no credit on your EPC at all.
Because you need to hit an E, and the heating element is quite a big element towards an EPC score, along with the envelope as well. So just be careful. Infrared is quite an interesting one because although it is one of the technologies that were in the government's review a few years ago in terms of a credible electric source, I think just because SAP works things out slightly differently to infrared, because infrared it's not kind of a traditional way of heating being delivered.
Yeah.
Essentially, it was quite difficult for them to give it the SAP rating. So I'm not sure whether that one day will be added onto the SAP tables.
But at the moment, it's not.
So again, you don't get any credit for it on the EPC.
I think that really where you're coming to here is the ones that the government love are new fan-assisted storage heaters, but make sure they are on the government's approved list. Cool off-gem, I guess, to make sure they're going to be picked up, because there's no point spending 700 quid on something that isn't going to do anything for your house.
Or I'd say you can work with your EPC assessor as well, because they've got tables in the software.
Some EPC assessors.
We can put a link at the bottom.
Some EPC assessors are better than others. And then heat pumps, obviously, because they're renewables, you see a massive spike. But cost-wise, if you're looking for something really flexible, you just go for a fan heater if it's going to be on for 20 minutes a day. Infrared heaters, they work really well. They're quite neat. They look smart. You don't get credit on your EPC if it's your own home and you don't need an EPC for it. Apart from when you come to sell it, then no issues. But if you're looking at renting it out, you don't get credit for the infrared yet, but I think it will come in time. Storage heaters, if you have the old storage heaters and you're swapping them out for new storage heaters, no problem. Just make sure they're on the recommended list. If you're taking storage heaters out and you're going to a different form of heating, make sure you move off economy 7, because otherwise you will get penalised in a big way. You will be paying a lot more for your bills. And then the heat pumps, if you've got lots of money, basically.
And I'd say bad idea to rip out existing gas for fan heaters.
Yeah, I think if you've got gas in your property, put in a central heating system. It might cost you more up front, but over time it'll pay back in spades. Mm-hmm. Done?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, right. So again, you seem a bit down today, all right?
No, I'm fine. I'm just, I'm anxious about the fun story at the end.
Right. Okay. I'm excited about you delivering that.
It might not be exciting to everyone as exciting to me.
So NG news this week. Go.
Well, there was a lot about LED lights and how more uptake, which we're seeing.
Yeah.
On a day as prices are coming down as well. So a few years ago, in terms of LED lights, it was very expensive.
The bulbs were.
So
when we first
were looking at what,
13 quid a bulb, 14 quid a bulb?
It was more than that.
Was it?
25, 30 pounds.
Yeah.
But now obviously you can go to a good hardware store, etc., and can find them for £1.50, £2.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether they will all last as long as what they say on the packaging, but certainly when you have them installed, they are a lot better than the old halogen spotlights, for instance. If that's the replacement you're going for.
And then people typically have those in their kitchens.
Exactly. The only thing, well, I think people are now getting it in terms of the different types of lights that they get. So I think previously when they first came out, they were really bright. I think just because people didn't understand color temperature. But yeah, you can get warm ones for your living rooms and bedrooms and stuff like that, and a bit brighter ones for bathrooms and kitchens.
And I think the other thing is every bulb now is available in an LED variety. When it first came out, there weren't that many types of LED, whereas because they've just become so big and so popular, all the manufacturers have made sure that you can get a sort of a replica LED bulb for every type, which makes things easier.
And I think in terms of, if you look at between domestic and business, where I think businesses have massively uptaken the adoption of LED as a standard for their office heating, and that's because obviously offices you tend to use lights even in the summer and winter, so they tend to use a lot of energy. Well, the government gives us credit, but I think since 2005, 95 terawatt hours have been saved.
So that was from the carbon brief this week.
Yeah.
So we give them a bit of credit. But they've worked out, since 2005, which is plenty. I mean, that is a huge amount of energy.
I don't know how to quantify that quite in terms of...
It's a lot. It's a lot.
How many days worth, but
yeah, and I think so someone was saying the other day, we were chatting in the office and we got this email through, and this fellow was saying the government really should lead the charge on this and basically go around every property and essentially enforce them to install LED bulbs. Because there were loads of people who were stockpiling their old types of bulbs, as people do. Exactly. But
the chicken sheds.
Actually, I sort of went through this thing very quickly, but this fella's maths and stuff, it all looked pretty promising. Mm-hmm. And maybe it is something the government should look at, as opposed to price caps, as we discussed last week. Although I know you like a price cap. Okay, so that's good, right?
And I think there's scope for much more adoption. I mean, we look at it in our office. We could, although we've started the process, we could certainly do a bit more on the LED front.
Well, we've got some new lights in here, and I can barely see because they're so bright. But I don't know they're LED because they are really hot.
Halogen bulbs got banned. Manufacturer got banned by the EU last year.
Yeah, well, these obviously were bought before then because I am absolutely stewing here.
So the next ones will have to be LED.
Yes, next ones will be LED. And we should lead the charge on that, obviously. Yes. Right, and then...
What's the bad news?
Bad news. Wind turbines. Loads of people don't like a wind turbine. I think future generations will come to accept them and it won't be an issue. They will just be part and parcel of living in the country. You'll see a wind turbine. I'm fine with them because I don't have any near my house. However... because they make electricity at such peculiar times, the government are paying individuals not to turn on, not to allow their wind turbines to switch. Right, these enormous wind turbines, you can change the blade orientation, and so even in the heaviest winds they won't spin because the wind will just come through them. So they are paying people to turn their wind turbines off, essentially. And this cost us, the UK, 135 million?
125 million.
125 million pounds in 2018.
Yes.
The majority, where was it?
Scotland.
Of course it was. Sorry. So the majority was in Scotland. That's because the majority of wind turbines. They have plenty of wind turbines up there.
It's not a win.
But it's it just seems a massive shame that we, and it is because we're subsidy driven, it's always going to be the case. But it seems a shame that you have something that can produce electricity and it's not running, and we have to pay someone to not produce electricity. Because surely we could sell that electricity through to other countries and do all sorts, or even store the electricity in we'll talk about energy storage in a future episode, but there are definitely ways we could use that electricity. So it just seems a bit miserable, to be honest. I think we're better than that. Anyway, right, finally, Nick, here we go. Drum roll.
Drum roll, please.
So, fun news. Go. Good. I don't know if this is fun, but this is good news. This is heartwarming news.
I saw that. Actually, I wanted to cover it last week. There was a fella in Peru, over in South America, so a PhD student, and he found quite a nifty way about doing something for his local climate ecosystem, etc. So he discovered this. He invented this nano powder, essentially. So the problem is, the lake where he grew up, was fishing when he was younger, etc., was all nice and beautiful, and there's lots of fish and stuff like that. But over time, chemicals and various other things, contaminants, got into the lake and basically became unusable. So he came up with a nifty idea where he uses this powder. Essentially, you put it into water, and then what it does is it takes all of the pollutants, sucks them up and brings them up to the surface, and then they just go around and clean them off, essentially. And he's done such a great job that now I think it took him a few weeks for this local lake in Peru. Cleaned it up completely, and now the lake is usable again. It's used for leisure.
And I've actually seen the video of the before and after, and if you can go and have a look at this online, you should. You definitely should.
Marino Morikawa, PhD.
How do you spell the surname?
Morikawa. Okay. Morikawa.
So go and look this guy up, because it is very, very cool. I mean, this lake is a mess, and then it
was a mess. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it looks really good now. And his aim is to go to the biggest lake in Peru and repeat the project. The issue...
We can put the link on what the biggest lake in Peru is.
I don't know that. The issue is that it's incredibly expensive, and it's difficult to do. But the good news is it's doable, right?
Yes.
And when we see all these videos of all the plastics and stuff in rivers and seas...
It's a massive number. I think the rivers and lakes thing got overlooked, I was going to say. So Harry just said 40% of Earth's lakes and rivers are contaminated. They've got some form of contamination, which is a staggering number.
It is. It's massive, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we don't really do a huge amount on recycling on kind of what we cover. But I think it is a massive thing. And I think these sort of... I'm going to use the term eco-warrior, but I actually... I think they're doing really good stuff, and this is quite a heartwarming thing. And he's taken his local lake, made it really nice again.
And I think he's if he can commercialise it and obviously make it into a point where if it's his business or where it's non-profitable or whatever, but he can scale it up and it works from a funding and delivery point of view, then all good for him. So that's great.
Good stuff. Right, that's that. Very good. Well, that's a heartwarming story to finish.
Ends on a positive from that wind turbine story.
Exactly.
That made me really depressed, but anyway.
Anyway, guys, so this podcast is now available on various different mediums.
You're extremely happy with that.
I'm really happy with that.
Including Spotify, which is one of my favourite.
iTunes.
Tune in. Don't know what that is.
There's Stitcher. Again, you can see we maybe not have heard of all these things, but so if you want to listen to our dulcet tones on the way to work or whatever, you can go and download them. We will There's links all over our website. So if you go to www.thegreenage.co.uk, you'll be able to subscribe to our podcast, and you will be able to hear Nick and I talk and ramble on and talk rubbish generally.
And Harry will make these links in terms of the technology we talked about. So what's halogen heater, infrared, all that stuff. So that will be made available in the comments below, including stuff that came out in the news and obviously this hot warming story at the end. So,
yeah, we need to give them a bit of a spotlight, I think.
Yes.
Anyway, guys, that's it for another episode. So thank you very much for listening, and we will speak to you, I guess, because I was going to say, because this is obviously on video, but now we're podcast folk. We will speak to them soon.